Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. You're glad you're here. A lot to do. Two great guests. Before we're done, it's Jake Fromm here today. A little bit of an unusual start. You know, Thursday's not normally his day, usually a Tuesday guy, but Jake will be with us today. Looking forward to that conversation. Terrence Edwards is almost always a Thursday guy with us, and we're happy about having him too. It's also a great day to have Terrence on the show because there's obviously new developments in the Colbie Young situation. What could that mean? And if Young does return to football, return to Georgia, what could that mean for the Dogs here in 2025? That will be on the table. And also off the top, you know, we've talked a little bit this week about a guy named Hero Canoe, defensive lineman from Ohio State, that was in the transfer portal, took a visit to Georgia, and then chose to go to Texas. I don't know that Georgia fans are panicked by any of this because, frankly, Canoe's not that well known of a football player. But it is a story that kind of rhymes with other stories that we followed in recent months, and it has led to some questions from Georgia fans. I'm going to pay credence to those questions here today and kind of talk about the nature of Georgia and the way in which you sort of win the modern recruiting battles. In fact, we'll start with that here this morning. We're glad you're with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, coming up in a couple of minutes, there is new developments in the situation involving Georgia wide receiver Colbie Young. We'll kind of give our spin on that coming up here in just a little bit, including what Kirby Smart said about that not too long ago. All of that on the way in a moment. Prior to that, though, I want to spend some time talking about what I feel like a lot of Georgia fans are currently speaking about in the moment. We've said before that we are the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. That means we try not to exist in the media echo chamber of just regurgitating whatever other media types are saying, even though we like many media types and certainly respect their work. We want to be a show that is a little bit more of a reflection of the ongoing fan chatter, because if we don't do that, who will? Ultimately, we feel like we sort of work for the audience, and we want the show to sound like what Georgia fan football conversations are sounding like at any moment they might be taking place. An example of that. So this week, a guy named Hero Canoe, a defensive lineman that Georgia recruited out of high school going back to what, class of 2022? Do I have that right? Ultimately chose to go to Ohio State, been there for a few years, deep defensive line, not exactly, kind of breaking through and getting a lot of playing time there in Columbus. Hard place to play on the defensive line after all. And so after the national championship season this year, has decided to kind of move on to the next phase of his football career. As many of you know, visited Florida, visited Georgia. There were photographs on the internet this week of that visit taking place at UGA, kind of continuing what had been sort of a long-standing relationship with him, with the program, and Trey Scott, the defensive line coach in particular. But then shortly after that visit to Georgia, Hero Canoe went to Texas, like literally has committed to Texas, presumably signing with Texas. And you don't have to look very far on the internet to find examples of rumors of another very sizable payday for a guy in Canoe that really not playing a ton. And certainly we said this even when we thought Georgia had a chance to get him. Probably not a difference-making defensive lineman, but you're always happy to have depth at these important positions. But apparently, according to the rumors on the internet, and you know, while we don't really believe the most exaggerated NIL claims, even if you cut some of these figures in half, it's still sort of a sizable amount of money being thrown around to a player that wasn't starting at Ohio State, might not start at Georgia, may not start at Texas, but you're sort of led to believe now that programs like Texas, I've sort of set a very high bar for what a reserve, rotational kind of depth piece along the defensive line perhaps costs, that Texas just is apparently willing to spend big money when it comes to a lot of positions, but perhaps the defensive line in particular, because this also kind of coincides with going back to months ago when it seemed like Justice Terry, the five-star defensive line commit from the state of Georgia, was likely to end up at the University of Georgia and ultimately went to Texas too. And that one was rumored to be a monumental sum of money. We're talking in the Hero Canoe case, probably, something, I don't know, the internet will lead you to believe mid six figures, something along those lines. Well, guess what? It was a seven-figure rumor as it relates to Justice Terry. Many of you certainly know that, whether it's true or not. I'll leave that for you to decide, but you don't have to look very far to find those sort of rumors. So here you have Georgia thinking it has a defensive line recruit. Boom, Texas swoops in. Here you have Georgia now thinking it might have an interesting transfer coming from the national champs, a guy that could vie for some playing time here. And once again, Texas swoops in. When it comes to replenishing its defensive line, seemingly there is no amount of money too high for any individual player, and collectively almost no budget when it comes to getting as many defensive line prospects as they can get. Georgia fans are noticing this. In fact, let me show you this from the X platform. A guy named George Armstrong wrote in to me, and I think this is reflective of the way that a lot of Georgia fans feel. They're not necessarily panicked, but they are asking questions, and some of these questions are provocative. And I believe that many of these questions are fair to ask. What George writes is, given that Justice Terry and Hero Canoe picked Texas, it makes me think that college football is over, he says, and that the oil money schools will be the ones filling rosters with top players, and winning all the championships. He says it's a shame. So I don't know that I agree that that college football is over necessarily. There's a lot of the change that's taken place in college football that I don't necessarily like, and I do believe that respecters of the tradition of what college football have been are going to have to defend it from the radical forces that would change it because they don't mind risking it, or change it because they outright don't like it. But there are radical forces that would change college football, and if they had their way, they would turn it into something unrecognizable. I do think somebody in college football ought to defend college football from that sort of imposed chaos. Right now, no one's stepping up and doing that effectively. I believe they should. So in other words, I don't think that college football is necessarily over the way that our listener just said there on the X platform, but I do believe that the caretakers, the stakeholders within college football need to be careful to protect it. I do believe that's true. But to bring it back to the Georgia part of this for a moment, what about schools like Texas? George a minute ago calls them the oil money schools, but it's really not it's not only the oil money schools who seem to be willing to spend sort of whatever it takes to get this done. Is that something that Georgia should be worried about? I think the answer is perhaps yes. This is one of those things where, just to be frank, it's important to ask the question right now, even if we don't necessarily know what the answer is. Because Mike Griffith and I got into this conversation a little bit yesterday. We're certainly led to believe that Ohio State spent more money than Georgia did on its roster for 2024. And obviously the money they spent, a big reason why they won the national championship. But at the same time, I think many of us who try to follow this stuff closely and try to talk to people, in my case, who know more than I do, people who, as I like to say, who kind of know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, getting kind of closer to where the action is, they would tell you that while Georgia's probably not spending the most of anyone, Georgia is trying to be, competitive with what other teams are spending. But there does seem to be, whether it's an Ohio State and its $20 million roster or, Texas and it's like mid six-figure backups, there does seem to be a level of spending right now that Georgia seems to be either unwilling to or unable to match. And the difference between those two phrases really matters. Is this an example of, and I read a story this week from The Athletic about Georgia being, quote, judicious with its NIL spending? I think in some form or fashion, that's a word that probably matches up pretty closely with what a lot of us believe. That Georgia is just given the fact that, if you want to put a theoretical value in the program, Georgia is one of the four most valuable programs in all of college football, theoretically, in terms of its sort of like, market cap or something like that. Georgia would be among the most valuable college football programs. Therefore, it's going to have a competitive amount of money to spend with most other programs. But when you see the really big spending taking place other places. Is this Georgia not wanting to do that, or because of just less overall financial wherewithal, not able to do that? Well, if you want to go back to September here for a moment, Kirby Smart did talk about this subject and the ever-evolving relationship that Georgia has with NIL. This coming after the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, had just put out an executive order related to NIL. This is Kirby Smart on kind of the feeling and the theory that his program has about how it uses this NIL money. Here's Kirby Smart. This is from September.
It's all about what you have available, right? And some people are willing to spend beyond their ability to raise it, like unfulfilled promises. Like, we're not going to have unfulfilled promises where guys reach back out and say, well, they said they could do this and they didn't. They said they could do that and they didn't. So we've lost some in those regards, but I don't know that it was an inability to do it. It was not going to go step over our skis and like put our body over and put too much out there and say, okay, we've committed to this and you can't do it.
So, that's Kirby Smart talking about that. And the word like judicious that we used before, you can certainly sort of hear an example of that. Kirby saying, we don't want to make promises that we can't keep, because Kirby is basically insinuating that some programs are. And I can tell you for a fact that is indeed happening. And not just in the case of Jaden Rashada and the lawsuit he had against Florida. There are other examples of players get to a program, they're told one thing, and then the deal changes, while they're on campus, and seemingly now with no recourse to kind of go back and do something against it. There is some of that has gone on. Players are victimized by that. Kirby Smart says, hey, we want to be careful that the promises that we're making are promises that we're able to keep. That's something that Smart says. Now, he also kind of goes on to talk about how all of this is then impacting the landscape of NIL. And then he kind of references the executive order that the governor gave. Let me let you hear a little bit more of Kirby Smart talking about this, about how Georgia's trying to make wise decisions in a world now where it just seems like the landscape's getting crazier and crazier and crazier. Here's Kirby Smart again.
It's a hard world out there because you don't really know what you can and can't do. People make promises, and there's no – nobody has a bounty sitting out there that big that they can pay everybody that. And so, you try to be judgmental. You try to make good decisions on players. You want people in your program that really not making it about just that. Because when it's just about that, it'll never stop. And that's not going to change based on what the governor does. I mean, with the governor's thing, it's not like it's going to be this open surplus. It's just helping us be competitive with others. And I'm sure Georgia Tech feels the same way. You're out there competing in a really competitive environment, and there's times you feel like you want to do something and you can't. And now, hopefully, we've got the capabilities to do what we need to do.
Kirby Smart is also around that same, topic, talked about, teams that have spent more money than they have. You're making promises for NIL when you don't really have the money. I mean, we did see Ohio State this year. It's been reported that their overall athletics budget deficit is going to end up being like $30 million in the red for this past season. And that's not really related to NIL, we don't believe. Accounting practices are kind of tricky anyway. So when they talk about being in the red financially, we don't necessarily know 100% sure what that means. But it is an example of, in the race to be as good as possible, some teams are willing to spend far more than they're making. And, obviously in defense of sort of Smart's view on this, well, clearly you can't operate in a sort of a deficit spending mode forever. You wouldn't be able to do that. And, Smart also says there, well, none of these teams have necessarily unlimited budgets. But at the same time, fans are also aware that according to an open records request published by USA Today, that Texas, and once again, this is not NIL spending, because NIL would be presumably a line item on a sort of a different org chart, the collective or something like that. Last year, Texas spent $325 million on operating expenses for its athletic department. These are just these gigantic sums of money that don't seem to have any connection with the reality. And the theory would be, well, if Texas athletic department can spend that much money on operating expenses, then how much could their boosters spend on the sort of paying of players and the stuff that kind of goes on in the NIL world? And it's fair to wonder if any of that has any limit an in right now? And as I said before, there's not necessarily an easy answer to this question. But I would say this, is that when it comes to the position that we're talking about right now, defensive line, it seems like the discussion around that is a little bit different than other places. In other words, you might say, boy, we want to have the most expensive quarterback every single year. But Ohio State didn't have anywhere near the most expensive quarterback this year. We're led to believe the NIL figure for, Will Howard, the Ohio State quarterback, was probably only about $1 million. Not a small amount of money, obviously, but far less than some other quarterbacks were making. And yet that was good enough to put Ohio State across the finish line as the national champion. Same thing is true when it comes to receiver position. We know the rumors of what, like, say, Jeremiah Smith was allegedly offered if he were to transfer. Apparently he's not going to take that. And you would think, well, if you're Georgia, you got to be spending that big on wide receivers. But Georgia can also come back and say, well, now, hold on now. We've been really good at scouting the receiver position. We found the Ladd McConkeys when nobody saw them. We found the A.D. Mitchells when he also was not necessarily an elite recruit. That we have been really good at scouting and getting good value out of receivers that maybe the rest of the industry, the rest of the sport perhaps overlooked. You can kind of explain some of that away. There are ways to mitigate against teams outspending in NIL at a lot of positions, but perhaps not at the defensive line position. And as we said before, the name of the game in the SEC, the recipe for success includes being great on the defensive line. And frankly, right now in the sport, I don't see any way to be great at defensive line other than paying for the best defensive line prospects. And clearly, Georgia must be doing some of that because they won with Elijah Griffin in the class of 2025, and guys that are returning to Georgia for the 2025 season obviously have a chance to be among the very best in the country. So Georgia's clearly spending something, otherwise it wouldn't have the talent that it has. But are other programs spending more at this key position? Right now, it sort of appears that might be the case. What do you do about that? How does that change? And how does Georgia, I guess, sort of re-level the playing field on all of that? No easy answer to that right now, but as we kind of move forward and these battles between Georgia and Texas, some of these other programs continue, those questions are going to continue to be asked. I think the fans are probably right to do so. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Glad you're with us. However you get to us, 10 a.m. across all platforms, radio, Athens Sports Radio 96 The Rev, podcasts, wherever you find them, Apple, Spotify, whatever else. We're just glad to have you as a part of the program today. Big thanks to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp who make it all possible. Your source for Georgia divorce. That is what Merriweather and Tharp is. And I know divorce is not a fun conversation. Completely get that. But it's a real conversation. And sometimes in life, it's the name of the game is just about confronting that reality. That's what you got to go out there and do. And if that's your story, if divorce is an unavoidable reality for you, then kind of meeting the moment and having an initial consultation like our friends at Merriweather and Tharp can provide, tell your story, to talk about your situation, and then get the counsel you deserve on how to make the proper decisions and take the right steps as you navigate through this process. That's what Merriweather and Tharp is all about. Going to have a lot of empathy for you as you go through that. One of the things they understand for you is you probably have some questions about, well, how much is this going to cost me? And Merriweather and Tharp, because they've dealt with these situations thousands of times before, they've been really creative in putting together what I think is a really clever, well-reasoned, well-thought-out plan to give you the cost certainty that you seek as you perhaps go through all of this. So I want you to find them online. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That's the website, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That website reflects the truth that Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce, no matter where you happen to be in Georgia right now. You can find them online, Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. That website, one more time, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That is GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com to get you in touch with Merriweather and Tharp. All right, we have got Jake Fromm before we're done today. Fun conversation with him. Terrence Edwards here in a couple of minutes. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse here today and interesting developments in the situation involving Georgia wide receiver Colbie Young. As you know, he's been facing criminal charges, but as you know, there's also been some I guess, change in that, situation over the course of the last few months. The accuser recanting her original story, his attorney, Young's attorney, Kim Stevens, forcefully pushing for these charges to be dropped. It seemed like at one point in time that might would have happened, and then it didn't. The criminal proceedings against him did persist. But yesterday, we got a significant change in all of this. I want to read you straight from the page of the DawgNation.com, just because it's sensitive. I want to make sure I get the words right here. Citing Mark Weiser, the Athens Banner Herald, Georgia wide receiver Colbie Young has reached a plea deal with the solicitor's office in Athens, Clark County. Young's lawyer, Kim Stevens, stated that the misdemeanor charge of simple battery was changed to disorderly conduct, and a charge of misdemeanor assault on an unborn child was dismissed. So Young gets 12 months probation, $500 fine, and he must complete a family violence intervention program. So that is a legal change here into the proceedings against Young that leads some to believe that the door might now be open for Colbie Young to return to Georgia football. We don't necessarily know if that's going to happen, both in terms of what Georgia wants and all this, and obviously Colbie Young himself would have to make a decision. But we have, going back to practice we had a chance to witness prior to the Sugar Bowl, we have seen Colbie continuing to practice at Georgia. He has maintained a presence around the team while his legal process has been ongoing. Certainly, Georgia has not abandoned Young in all of this, and Young hasn't left the Georgia program. Oftentimes when a player is not around, and by the way, if you're watching on video, you see an example of that, Colbie Young catching a nice touchdown during a drill during the practice we observed just before the team left to go to New Orleans for that Sugar Bowl, ironically enough thrown by Jaden Rashada. But nonetheless, Young's been out there. He's been practicing, been involved in all of this. Sometimes when you're not with the team, I think you almost kind of read that into, well, maybe you're no longer on the team. But in the case of Colbie Young, his proximity to the UGA program, I think would lead you to believe there's a pretty good chance that he perhaps now returns. Now, as far as the legal part of all of this, obviously that's not really our beat. That's not really our typical topic here on the show. I don't have a whole lot of opinion on that other than Colbie Young, like any other citizen, has a right to defend himself in court and defend himself against criminal charges, and that is what he's done. His attorney has been adamant throughout this entire process that he wasn't guilty of what he was accused of, and that never really changed. And I guess ultimately, you now have the resulting plea here that perhaps, kind of changed the situation for him overall. Once again, kind of going back to the time of Georgia being in New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl, at a long press conference while UGA was there, one of the questions that Kirby Smart fielded was about the status of Colbie Young. This is what Kirby said at the time, and certainly when you listen to this, it certainly sounds like that door could be open for return if the legal situation was resolved. This is what Kirby Smart said just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, Colbie and I have had those discussions. I think only time will tell on that. I'd rather keep those conversations kind of between, he and I, because he has a lot of things going on.
So that's Kirby, sort of matter of fact, but nonetheless, kind of giving you an idea that what you take from that is the fact that the conversations have been taking place. These were discussions. And to sort of make this be solely about football for a moment, in a lot of ways, I see Colbie as kind of similar to Noah Thomas. Now, I don't know, player-wise, if they're that similar, but I see their stat lines as pretty similar. What I liked about Colbie when he came from Miami was he'd caught 10 touchdowns in 2 years with the Hurricanes, caught 2 touchdowns in the 5 games that he played with Georgia. That, to me, is the sort of repeatable skill that gives value to an offense. Noah Thomas is a little bit the same way at Texas A&M. 2 guys that might be vying for, playing time with what you call the X position for Georgia. Thomas at Texas A&M has also been a guy that's caught touchdown passes. That's obviously a valuable commodity. So if Young can return, I do believe he would have value for UGA. I think he'd be in a competition with Noah Thomas, but I also think there's enough and we'll talk to Terrence Edwards about this in a moment. I think there are enough snaps to go around to sort of feed Thomas and to feed Colbie Young. Now, if Young is indeed coming back to Georgia, he's got a choice to make. Georgia would have a choice to make. We don't want to get too far out and ahead of ourselves here, but this is the relevant discussion taking place. if Young were to return to Georgia, you also start to get a little bit more crowded with, okay, guys who've got experience. Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas as transfers. Colbie Young is now a returner. You've also got guys like, and by returner, I mean, returner to the program. You've got guys who've kind of been here, kind of waiting for their next moment, like a Nitro Tuggle or a Sokovie White. You've got incoming freshmen to the program, most notably Talon Taylor, but also C.J. Wiley, Landon Roldan, Blackshear. That, Georgia clearly has a big need at receiver, and a lot of bodies to help meet that need is just more statistically probable that you'll get a satisfying conclusion. But at the same time, you don't want anybody blocking anybody else. You want Georgia's young guys who are kind of waiting for their moment. You want them to have their chance too. Incoming freshmen, go back to the topic of NIL, that presumably Georgia probably had to pay decently sizable dollars to bring in. You want them to see their path at playing time here as well. So in other words, if Young does come back, if the legal resolution opens the door for that, I think that's good news for Georgia. And that's a guy, because of his, stat line, you'd probably be pretty glad to have. But how you kind of sift through all this and find some room for your veterans, including your transfers, while also making some space for your guys who've been here and worked while they waited, and the incoming freshmen who certainly come in with plenty of accolades, how you manage all those snaps and all those touches and all that playing time should be a pretty significant challenge for this Georgia coaching staff as you move towards the spring and as you move towards the fall, if it does turn out to be true that Young will be returning. That is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Before I move on, bring on Terrence Edwards, let me also remind you that ongoing right now, you have your chance to win your way onto our DawgNation cruise. Obviously, we're going to be on board Utopia of the Seas coming up in April, and someone here is going to win a stateroom for two with us on the DawgNation cruise on board Utopia of the Seas, a hotel room the night before the cruise takes off, because you always kind of enjoy kind of being right there in the port, so you can wake up in the morning, get on the ship. So we'll give you a hotel room to do that. Gas card to help you get to Port Canaveral, some onboard credit to enjoy while you're on Utopia of the Seas. Great contest giveaway. It's all courtesy of our friends at Kroger. An amazing thing for Kroger to do, to give somebody a chance to be a part of this awesome DawgNation cruise. So please go to DawgNation.com/contest for your chance to win. DawgNation.com/contests. That's with an E, contests. DawgNation.com/contest for your chance to win on that. All you have to do is tell us your favorite moment from the 2024 season. Obviously, a lot of those to pick from in an SEC championship year for UGA. Tell us your favorite moment. You could be selected at random, and you and a guest could be on your way to our DawgNation cruise on board Utopia of the Seas this April. So go to DawgNation.com/contests for more on that. All right, before we're done, it's the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. Always a fun conversation. But for now, everything going on with these wide receivers, like I just discussed, let's talk about that and so much more. Terrence Edwards here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Well, let me say hello to Terrence Edwards here. Great guest to have on today when there is news involving the Georgia wide receiver room. And I think that based on the legal status change here for Colbie Young, that plea deal, perhaps it opens the door for him to return to UGA. Terrence, let me start with this. And obviously the legal part of this is I'm not even that interested in talking about that. That's for a different show, different whatever else. But the football part of this, if Young is able to return, let me begin with this. What kind of player do you think Colbie Young is based on what you've seen from him in the past?
Yes, I thought he was on his way to having a really good year this year. The first 3 or 4 games he had opportunity to play. I thought he made the plays that was presented to him. I think he brings a dynamic to the field that's, his height being 6'3", 6'4", and 220 pounds. So I think that gives you an advantage. And I think that hurt us a lot with him being able to not play. So I'm excited to see him and being able to see Noah, just having 2 guys that Noah is 6'6" and Colbie 6'3", 6'4", big body. Just really to see both of those guys out on the field and see if we could take advantage of something that was God-given, and that's their height.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And obviously, speculation's often wrong, especially mine. But I would speculate that, given the fact that Young was around the program, was practicing even right before the Sugar Bowl, you might be led to believe that Georgia standing beside Colbie throughout all of this, Colbie keeping close proximity to UGA, that if Young does play in 2025, and obviously I guess some of this is also predicated on like the interpretation of the redshirt rule and time spent at junior colleges and how that impacts your eligibility, which is the kind of thing that makes your eyes gloss over a little bit. But if Young does play college football in 2025, my speculation would be that it probably will be for Georgia. Does that seem like, I guess, reckless speculation to say it that way? But just given the fact that these two entities, the player and the program, remain close throughout all of this, my assumption is that if Young is playing, it's likely for UGA.
Yes, I mean, I'm not going to touch on the legal part of it because I don't know that part, but just from a football standpoint, I think this would probably be the best spot for him if everything goes well and he's welcomed back and everything is cleared up. I think this is probably the best opportunity for him, get an opportunity to go out and play for one of the best programs, having the opportunity now that a lot of Dominique is gone. You will probably be the clear-cut favorite for an X or Z position. And I think that would bring a lot of he will bring stability to that position. I think that we missed last year, and I hope everything works out for the best for the young man. I hope he stays in the Georgia uniform.
And unequivocally, I think that if Young were to return, I do believe it would be good news for Georgia. I also mentioned this, that it becomes an interesting, I think, situation for the coaching staff, for James Coley, the wide receivers coach, Mike Bobo, presumably the offensive coordinator. I think it becomes an interesting situation for them to navigate because you're going to have veteran players. You mentioned Noah Thomas, the transfer, Zachariah Branch, a little bit of a different position fit, but a veteran guy who's played some. Maybe it's Colbie Young. You've got receivers who've been at Georgia kind of waiting for their moment, like Nitro Tuggle and Sokovie White. You've got the most heralded class of incoming freshmen that Georgia's probably had in quite some time, that everybody's kind of going to kind of want their touches. And, history would lead us to believe that the veterans will be first in line for that because the SEC is a league where veteran players have a tendency to play better. But boy, for players who were patient a year ago, kind of hoping for their moment, they're maybe expecting that to be 2025. And for the level of recruit that Georgia signed at that position for the class of 2025, they're going to expect their opportunities as well. Sifting through that and deciding who gets touches and who gets playing time, that's a little bit of a challenge for this Georgia coaching staff coming up too, right?
I think so. And I tell my players all the time that it's not up to me who plays. Your plays determine how well you practice. Your plays determine how well of a good of a teammate you are. Your play determines how well you understand the playbook. It's what you put into it. I'm not just going to give you, or you should be entitled to playing time. Playing time is earned. So if you're not putting in your time right now in the weight room, if you're not putting your time in the classroom, you don't deserve to play. So with this, guys yes, they coming back, but it's up to you what you do. It's all on the player. Coaches, in my mind, don't dictate playing time. Players dictate playing time by the way they practice, by the way they present themselves off the field, by the way they understand the game plan, and just the time and effort they put into it. So it's up to them how well they want to be. If they're going to be as good as they want to be, and it's not up to the coaches.
I think that's a fair point. Let me ask you one more thing about this, and we'll talk about something different. Because of the kinds of players that Georgia brought in for the class of 2025, and at least a couple of those cases, guys that very, very well, because of the level of player we would believe this is, or let me say it a different way, the level of prospect we would believe these guys to be. My assumption is that somebody's going to cut the line on somebody, right? Whether it be, transfers who come in expecting, whatever, guys who've been here for at least a year, kind of expecting their moment. A lot of that will probably work out the way that you think it's probably supposed to. But just given the level of talent that Georgia's bringing in with its incoming freshmen, somebody's going to try to jump to the front of the line here and say, I may be young, but a little bit like what a KJ Bolden would have done on the defensive side last year. my talent is such that I've got to be on the football field. I'm expecting at least one of those freshmen to probably demonstrate something like that. Is that something you also believe?
Oh, most definitely. I think you recruit every year to take somebody's position. So that's just the way it is. You know, you're trying to recruit position to get better at said position. So there is going to be somebody that just steps up and just unequivocally just better than the person that's ahead of them. And if everything works out for as learning the playbook, staying on schedule for his classroom, social life, somebody's going to cut line because you're just better. The cream always rises to the top. So who that person is, we won't know until they get into the program, they get into the weight room, they get into spring practice, they get into fall practice. Somebody's going to separate themselves, and it always has been that way. KJ was that one last year, and it's going to be somebody else this year.
Changing the subject here, how happy have you been? I don't know if you've seen much of this, but Arian Smith been really showing out, it seems like, this week at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. DawgNation's been there for coverage of that, and Smith's had a lot of nice moments, you know, some really nice catches, and just seems to be kind of showcasing his skills in a very positive way. Terrence, I know you know what it's like to kind of make that transition from college to professional football player. A lot of pressure comes with that. You're trying to sort of set yourself up for a career, and it seems like Arian is thriving in this moment right now. How happy are you for him on that?
Very happy. I've seen some clips of the young man making some really tough catches. Some of the catches that he didn't make this year. And I'm happy for him being able to showcase his talent in front of a lot of GMs, a lot of coaches. I think every team receives these film clips, and they can show that, you know, the young man has actually been working. This is a lot of pressure on the young man. He understands the knock on him and what happened this year at Georgia. So he has to go down there and show the scouts, the coaches, the GMs that was just an aberration. And I'm happy for the young man, because this is every young man's dream, to be able to be put in a position to showcase your talent. And hopefully, you know, one team likes it enough to get his name called on draft day. If not, there's always opportunity as a free agent, which the route I went and made the team.
Yeah,
I think the young man has a opportunity to make, because he is a great special teams player. So you need guys that's able to run down on kicks and just use his speed. And I love the way Georgia plays their players. The star players have to go out there and run down on kickoff or punt team, just to show the versatility of the player.
And, you know, candidly, when you look at Arian Smith, obviously your mind goes to, boy, what could have been true for him at Georgia here this year. Obviously, the kinds of catches video we have, the video we're showing of him making here this week. But at the same time, Terrence, I also think it's appropriate to remember, you know, that Arian was involved in some of the really big moments in recent Georgia history. The incredible touchdown against Ohio State, that's a big moment that propelled that comeback for Georgia that day. Had a big catch in the Tennessee game in 2022, one of the great, you know, regular season wins of this championship era for Georgia. You know, obviously right now, for a lot of fans, drops are top of mind. When you think about Arian Smith, he was not the only Georgia receiver who dealt with that, of course, but drops might be top of mind. But as more time passes, I do hope there's a better chance of reflecting on, like I said, that Ohio State game was a thrilling win for UGA, and Arian Smith's fingerprints are all over that. So I do hope as more time passes, stuff like that becomes more a part of the Arian Smith story for many Georgia fans, and I'm sure you feel the same way.
Yes, I think, you know, he made a lot more plays. That catch against Ohio State kind of catapulted us into going into the national championship and making the comeback versus Ohio State, the Tennessee catch. So he's made a lot of great plays. And just for somebody who's, as myself, who's the all-time leader receiver in Georgia history and receiving yards and touchdowns, you have that very few. All they remember is the drop against Florida.
Yeah.
But how about all the great plays that I made, the catches in the Florida State in the Sugar Bowl, the touchdown in that game, and all the other games in the Alabama game, going out and help scoring a touchdown to beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Like, but you just want to mention that drop against Florida. Like, so there are going to be a lot of people like myself and you always remember Arian in a positive light, but there's going to be a few that's all they want to talk about is he dropped so many passes this year. Well, he made a lot more plays than he missed. And I for one, will remember the Ohio catch that kind of sparked us into winning that game more than anything in his career.
I think you're bringing up something really important. I know this is something that one of your coaches, Mark Richt, used to talk about, the famous like Teddy Roosevelt line about the man in the arena. Like, it's hard to be the guy on the field. Now, you get the glory, and these days you get the money and you get the girl. There's some stuff that kind of goes along with it. But at the same time, man, to have 100,000 people in the stadium watching you, millions of people on TV watching you, and, the mistakes are just magnified so much. And it takes a lot of guts to be the man in the arena, to be the guy on the field, and to just sort of live with the idea that, hey, sometimes I'm going to get, the pat on the back because I contributed to the win. And, sometimes because we're all human, we're all fallible, sometimes it's not going to go my way and the whole world's going to kind of see me in my sort of darkest athletic moment. Like it takes guts to be the guy on the field, does it not?
Yes, and most of the people who have the courage to tweet or do some form of social media or talk about players, just imagine that a million people are watching you do your job every day and critique your job every day. How would you feel? Yeah. Like, that is pressure, and they have to go out and perform. Say we have to go out and perform every Saturday with millions of people watching. And if there's one mistake or something that is done that you don't see favorable, you could go on social media and just trash the player. And I wish we could do the same at your job. I wonder how that would make you feel.
That's a pretty good idea for a segment. Maybe one of these days we'll do that. Terrence, there's so much more I could talk to you about. I always appreciate your time. But for now, let me just leave it there and remind folks that you got some great stuff going on with the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy this time of year.
Yes, Monday is the start of the bubble work, February 3rd, from 6 to 7:30. And it's this time of the year is where all the work that people don't see is put in. So I'm excited about this is my 10th or 11th season doing this. And I still have the same passion that I've had when I started this. So I can't wait to see all the young men who's putting in the work to get to be the best version of themselves. So Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy on all social media platforms.
Yeah, we don't doubt that passion, not for 1 second. Terrence, great stuff. Thanks for your time here today. We'll look forward to talking to you soon right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I love that from Terrence, and I tell my kids, some version of that all the time too, because it's like, whatever sport you're in, you got gym full of people, or people all gather around the field, and sometimes you're just gonna mess up, and it feels bad to mess up. You feel like you let your teammates down. You feel like you embarrassed in front of everybody else. But man, part of the strength of living a great life is having the courage to just be okay with that. And honestly, a lot of people hide from those moments, and they end up kind of hiding from life. Don't be one of those people. So with that said, I'll get off my soapbox. But I thought that was really good stuff from Terrence Edwards. And more good guests here coming up in a moment. Jake Fromm, we'll look forward to that conversation with him. Prior to that, let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. DawgNation Cruise coming up in April. Kroger giving away a chance for you to be on board, but you also can jump on and make your own plans to be there with us. And if it's not the DawgNation Cruise for you, a Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation sometime this year, great experience. And what I love about Royal Caribbean is they really think about your experience in terms of what you have happen for you on board, but also how you book this. It's one of the reasons why they encourage you to work with a great travel agent. They believe that all the choices, the decisions you make, will all be made better when you work with a great travel agent. Jessica Slater is that person for us, especially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147, 770-718-9147. Email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. All the questions you perhaps have that you hear me talking about, well, BA said this and BA said that. Jessica can fill in all the gaps, give you all the details you need about how you can have a great Royal Caribbean Cruise vacation here in 2025. No joke and no hyperbole. I think you deserve it. I really do. I think everybody needs a vacation, to be honest with you. I'm sort of getting ready for a vacation. I am not going to lie. I think everybody deserves one, you and your family and those that you love. Get ready to enjoy one here in 2025 with Royal Caribbean, and let Jessica Slater help you plan it. Okay, let's go through quickly here before we say hello to Jake Fromm. A couple of stories. Cruise around the SEC. CBS chronicling the coaches that have not won a national championship yet that could be the next to win their first national championship. And right there at the top of the list is Texas coach Steve Sarkisian. Now, we began the show today by saying right now it seems like a handful of teams, perhaps Texas being one of them, spending more money than NIL right now. And as I said, I think that's a real question that deserves legitimate answers and the kind of thing that you perhaps can't just answer in a knee-jerk 5-second response. You probably have to observe some of what's going to play out in college football over the course of the next few months and perhaps even the next couple of years to know where all that's really heading. So I don't want to be trite about any of this. But at the same time, when you look at what Texas is compared to what Georgia is, I can say this without any hesitation. Would I rather be the team that has the most money or be the team that has the most wins? And right now, I'd rather be the team with the most wins. Georgia has the wins head-to-head against Sarkisian, 2 of them this past year. Kirby Smart's got national championships, 2 of his own. Sarkisian's still waiting for all that to occur. Now, like a lot of things in sports, maybe the money that Texas is spending is simply a sort of a harbinger of the success they're about to have. Maybe that's the case, but not always guaranteed here. That there are lots of things in sports that money can buy. There's a certain sort of like last 5 yards in your march towards the end zone that is not for sale, that is only kind of determined by your own sort of intestinal fortitude, whatever else. So I take the money that a program like Texas is spending seriously, I truly do. And yet I also take what Georgia has that Texas doesn't have and realize that kind of thing, the intangible qualities that's contributed to that success, that's not for sale, and Georgia seems to have plenty of that. I'll mention 2 other stories just kind of quickly here together, and then we'll say hello to Jake Fromm. Have you seen Illinois coach Brett Bielema and his online assault of Jim Harbaugh? Essentially accusing him of being a liar, basically taunting him about, the stuff that went on with the Connor Stallion stuff and the fact that Harbaugh and Bielema's description of this kind of ran to the NFL, really kind of going after him a little bit. And we've talked a lot about what the SEC is now, the Big Ten trying to be what the SEC has been. And this is certainly an example of that, the sort of coaching, infighting, and drama, that sort of thing. A little bit different for the Big Ten, a little bit more in keeping with what we used to see for the SEC. This is really an interesting league now in that a lot of the offseason chatter here thus far has kind of centered around the Big Ten. Crazy stuff involving, Penn State suing Ohio State's defensive coordinator, Bielema taking shots at Harbaugh. You've also got Michigan suing the NCAA involving the Connor Stallions allegations. The Big Ten has become a little bit of a soap opera off the field, which is certainly interesting to see. Kind of encroaching on sort of turf we would have expected the SEC to be a part of. But anyway, for now, we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on DawgNation Daily, always great to have Jake Fromm. Not normally a Thursday, but great to have him anytime we can get him for a Kroger Fresh Take. Jake here today on DawgNation Daily. Jake, appreciate your time, and I guess you're kind of getting settled into a little bit of an offseason now, and obviously you would love for your Detroit Lions to have kept on playing, and maybe next year that'll be the case, but also probably a little nice to kind of get back home and sort of settle into a break. NFL seasons, when you think about the season itself and the preseason and everything else, the training camp, kind of a long grind. What's the early days of this offseason been like for you?
Yeah, it's definitely a long grind, Brandon. Thank you for having me here on the show today. And hopefully next year we are playing in this time of the year because it's always so special. But after the season's done, man, you kind of go into scramble mode. For me personally, the end of January is kind of the end of duck season. So took a little time away and got in the duck woods and shot a few. So and that was kind of my mini postseason vacation. And now we're back here at the house here in Athens and trying to sort everything, get everything in order, and get ready for another offseason.
I would say that for me, when the football season ends, I'm a little bit, I don't want to say lost, but I like my schedule. I like my regiment. I like knowing I'm going to be here on certain day and there on certain day. And I probably don't do quite as well in the less scheduled part of the year. You're a lot more regimented than me because you're actual player. Like, how do you do with not quite having as much scheduled time?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I'm a very habitual person. got a routine, got a schedule, and especially in season because, I mean, it's just a week to week and everything's clicking. But, man, kind of transitioning to the offseason is so unique. Everybody's different. For me, I kind of immediately after the season just take 2 weeks. Hey, anything goes, whatever, 2 weeks, get your mind off of it. And then after that 2 week period, then we kind of start building back up into a routine, into a schedule, into working out, all the different things that go on with that. So, it's different for everyone. But for me, I definitely give myself a good 2 week break, do whatever, eat whatever, and try to hunt as much as I can.
I love that. It's great to hear. How much of a concern do you think it is that we're hearing rumors, and a lot of this stuff is obviously made up. We know that. But even if it's like 25% true, we're still talking about large sums of money. Like, how much would you say it's a concern that some programs out there, Texas, the one we're talking about, today, seems to either be able to or willing to spend an amount of money on recruits out of high school or players out of the transfer portal that Georgia either is unwilling or unable to spend? There seems to be an arms race financially where some teams are just sort of doing things right now that Georgia isn't. Not that Georgia's not competitive, but Georgia's not the wildest, biggest spender we're led to believe. How much of a concern do you think that is?
I mean, it's definitely a concern. I mean, because right now money equals arguably better talented players. I mean, that's not always the case. I think why I'm not as worried about it as maybe some. I mean, Colbie has built a program built around the right things. He's got a phenomenal culture, competing, putting people into the league. So when you have that kind of genetic makeup of your university, of your culture, of your team, you can recruit the right people, the right mindseted people to come to your university for all the right reasons. So there is that still out there. Obviously, for a great example would be Clemson and Dabo, and they're a great brand that they have. So it's still out there, and you can still do it. But a lot of times it comes down to a dollar amount, and you may have to make that leap and make that jump to either keep a player like we've seen here recently in the past, or go get a player.
Yeah, because like we talked about this a little bit yesterday, that if you look at Ohio State, obviously everybody's talking about the fact that allegedly they were a $20 million roster, and yet in addition to the money spent, if you read some of the reporting that comes out of Columbus, and some of this gets exaggerated because they won, but some of the reporting comes out of Columbus would also lead you to believe this was a team that had an incredibly strong team chemistry this year too, that the money didn't seem to change the relationships that existed with some of the players, especially the ones that had been there, didn't seem to change the relationship the players had with each other. So I guess going forward, I think for Georgia it's interesting because we would say that connectivity and our connection between the players was a big part of why Georgia won in 2021 and 2022. And so, Jake, I find myself wondering, like, moving forward, will it eventually just be about the money? Is it L.A. Dodgers style spending is what's going to, conquer college football? Or in the case of Georgia a couple of years ago, Ohio State this year, that finding a way to get along with each other while money is obviously, kind of a factor in the locker room, that's still going to be a big part of the discussion too. And to be honest with you, I can't quite tell where all of this is heading just yet.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's going to be a mix kind of all of these different factors. For some guys, it may just be all about a dollar value. For some guys, they want to build relationships. For other guys, they just really love that university and want to play because they grew up watching or had a relative play at that university. There's so many different factors that go into why these young men want to play for these universities. And you kind of, as a coach and as a recruiter, you have to figure out what makes them tick and kind of what their draw is to you as a school, and be able to allocate funds or put resources into recruiting them the best way. So, I think it just depends on your coach. Depends on the higher ups at your university and your program of kind of, hey, what do you want to be? What are you about? And right now it looks like Texas wants to spend a lot of money and recruit kind of the best players and buy the best players. And that is a strategy for them, and we'll see if it pays off here in the future.
Because I'll say one more thing about this, and there's another topic I want to ask you about. You know, when NIL first stuff started, the mantra was, well, listen, the long-term NFL dollars are going to be more lucrative than the short-term NIL dollars. And when we first got started with this, that was probably true. But, Jake, some of the stuff that's out there now, and once again, I'm pretty skeptical about the more outrageous claims. I'm pretty skeptical of them. But even if a portion of that is true, then some of the NIL money right now is so, outrageous that it's almost like you would put the NFL aside and say, I don't care about my NFL development. I'm getting paid right now. I mean, we are getting into an age in which the NIL dollars are so substantial that, honestly, maybe you don't worry about the NFL as much anymore. No,
you are exactly right, especially the number values associated with a lot of these quarterbacks and transfer quarterbacks. The first thing they taught me in finance class in school was $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. Yep. So take what you can get now and keep doing it. You never know what the future holds and what's in store for you later down the road. And so go get it now while you can in this great age of college football for these young guys. And I don't know for me why you wouldn't and try to have a 4, 5, 6 year career in college, because the NFL is not going anywhere. And for me, it looks like the more experienced, older, wisdom, more developed you are, technique and physically, it pays off better for you in the NFL.
I want to squeeze in one more question before we let you go. Let me also remind folks, it's our Kroger Fresh Take. Kroger's got a great membership opportunity for you. It's called Kroger Boost. You want to take advantage of the fact you're already shopping at Kroger, you're already saving big in store, but you can also save at the fuel pump because of that. In fact, as a Kroger Boost member, you can earn twice the fuel points for every dollar you spend there at your local Kroger. You can also take advantage of free grocery delivery, free pickup. It's an awesome membership opportunity. It's Kroger.com/boost for more on that. That is Kroger.com/boost. All right, Jake, in the time we have left, let me ask you one more question here. One of the things that comes up is, okay, well, the Colbie Young plea deal happens. Perhaps that opens the door for him to return to Georgia. All of this, of course, speculation for right now. But let me take this to a place that's not speculation. If he's here, that's a veteran added to a Noah Thomas transfer, a Zachariah Branch transfer. You've also got, players like Sokovie White and Nitro Tuggle kind of waiting in the wings, looking for their opportunity. You've got the best crop of incoming freshmen. Georgia's had the receiver position in quite some time, probably. How important do you think it is for Georgia, for the offensive coaching staff to say, this is a place where young guys can also still get their opportunity? Noah Thomas looks like a pretty good player. Colbie Young, if he returns, we believe he's a good player. Guys who've been here, they may be good players too. Incoming freshmen, they want their chance. How important is it for Georgia to sort of obviously respect the veterans, what they can provide, but also perhaps leave the door open that one of these young players has a chance to impress? Not easy to do in the SEC, but how important is it for Georgia to kind of create space for that opportunity to occur?
Yeah, it starts with Kirby and how he builds his program and on competition. He's going to look those young men in the eyes and say, hey, if you want to be great and if you want to be good and if you're as good as you think you are, come here, compete. And if you are good and if you're going to help us win, you're going to play. So he makes it very simple on that. If you can help the team in any way, he will find a spot and an opportunity for you. So, whether you are a big, tall guy who can, be very well for us in the red zone, or a speed guy, a long speed guy, and you can take the top off and help these safeties kind of back up and give some room for the run game, then he can find a spot for you there as well. So it's a great sales pitch, and they do a great job of rotating guys around. And that's a skill group in a position who kind of underperformed last year to a lot of expectations. So that room's going to have a lot of pressure in that room, and they're going to need somebody to step up.
Jake, always appreciate your time. You step up, whether it's a Tuesday or a Thursday, whatever day we have you in the program. You're always great. Appreciate your time. Enjoy your kind of time off here during the off season, and we'll look forward to having you as part of a Kroger Fresh Take again on DawgNation Daily very soon.
Thank you, Brandon. See you next Tuesday.
Great stuff. Loving having Jake Fromm on the program. Always good stuff from him. And we'll give out a golden shoe here as well. Jake, a big baseball fan. Perhaps he has seen this, has an opinion. So Georgia unveiling brand new turf here at Foley Field for the upcoming baseball season. I do mean turf. Now, this looks really nice, right? I love the script Bulldogs. It's a sharp look behind home plate. But it is all turf. It is, even like what you kind of think of as the infield dirt. If you're watching a video, you see this. Even that is now turf. So like it is like sheer, just like no dirt, no grass, just nothing but turf there for Foley Field. That's an interesting thing for me. That's going to take a little time for me to get used to. But Georgia has unveiled that, so we'll give them a golden shoe for the new look there at Foley Field. They also got a beautiful new facility kind of attached to that, so that's all looking good. Diamond Dogs expected to be among the best in the SEC, which means best in the nation this season, so we're excited about baseball season being here. We're also excited about the beatdown that Georgia has been giving on a regular basis to those lousy, stinking Gators. About 1,545 days. That is how long it's been since Florida has beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. We hope you all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. We'll take some of your comments here for a moment. You want to talk about anything for today's show or pretty much anything else you might like to discuss. We'll give you your chance to do that, and we hope you're all doing well. Let me get some YouTube here for a moment. Let's see what's going on. Jerry Dogs fan says he likes the old UGA logo. I don't know if that's in reference to the can we see the golden shoe again one more time? Like, I don't want to be, critical here, but I have never liked the dog face logo. And listen, I love UGA and I love the people who, I obviously nothing but love for Georgia. I do not like that logo. The script Bulldogs for baseball, that just screams baseball. I love that. I think that's awesome. That dog face logo, I just don't like it. I like the standing dog. I like the dog holding the pennant. I like the old school dog face from when we were a kid. That sort of the more scrunched looking face that kind of slouched to the one side. I like that dog face. And maybe young people like that particular dog face right there. That is not a logo. I don't think I have any gear that has that logo on it. Don't think I'm really in the market for that logo. What do you think about that, Cody?
I love the new dog face, actually.
Do you really?
The old one to me always just it was too old, and so I've come around to it as I've gotten older. But when this one came out, maybe it was just like the exact time I was in school or right after. I just thought it was cool, and so I actually have always been a fan of it. I'm
actually really surprised to hear that because I would have thought you'd be more of a like. What about like the dog on four legs?
Love the dog standing.
That's an awesome one.
Anything with that looks super. You wear a lot of that stuff, looks super sharp.
Do you know the one where it's the dog that's kind of got his like elbow propped up on a G? Do you know that logo?
Yes, I have.
That's an awesome one.
Something from my grandparents' house that he's leaned on.
So they're bringing that one back, and I like that. I like the dog holding the pennant, one of my favorite ones too. For some reason, I think I gravitate more towards that retro style, probably because in my spirit, I'm 217 years old. That may be part of it. As like people, you've heard it said, "Oh, so and so is an old soul." I think I'm the oldest soul. I think my soul is probably thousands of years old. Christy said, "Who was that?" It was the voice of God. That was our producer Cody Chaffins chiming in there. That's who that was, Christy. That was our producer Cody Chaffins. Jerry Dog fan says, "Would you be surprised if Puglisi got the start over Gunnar Stockton?" Barring injury, I'd be shocked. And that's not to disrespect Ryan Puglisi. But I just think there is a lot to absorb about being the Georgia starting quarterback. And when Carson Beck was competing against Brock Vandagriff, Beck was a heavy favorite. Because Beck had been around longer, had sort of absorbed more of that. When Stockton's going to compete against Puglisi here this year, I think Stockton is a heavy favorite. We did a Ryan Puglisi topic on here the other day. The goal for Puglisi is to absorb what needs to be absorbed so that you would feel okay about playing him if you got to that point. I don't think that George would want to put Ryan Puglisi into a game today. And that he may go on to be, Y.A. Tittle. I mean, to give you a very dated reference. Like, he may go on to be a great quarterback. But I don't think that George would feel great about putting Puglisi into a game today. But over the course of the next, let's say, 6, 7, 8 months, a lot of that can change. And his readiness in September may be different than his readiness in November. This is a year in which I think that if you're thinking, big arm Puglisi looks the part. We talked about this the other day, that if you cast a quarterback in a movie, Puglisi clearly looks like that. And, the same way that, the backup quarterback is going to always have his fans and his supporters. And, when you've seen the starter, there's always the potential, well, maybe so-and-so is even better than this. I think that Ryan Puglisi is probably a ways away from being truly game ready, but that doesn't mean that after a few more months, he might not be a game-ready player, and once he is, he may go on to greater heights than any quarterback that Kirby Smart has ever had. Perhaps that's the case, but I don't believe that Ryan Puglisi is game-ready right now. Because I think that Puglisi was probably close with Rashada, and we obviously, kind of know how that worked out. See, I like this. Now, I think I've also kind of gone – so at one point in time, I viewed this to be out of style. Like, if you want to say, like, early 2000s, you would have not, or as I like to say, the early 2000s, you would not have caught me wearing this logo in the early 2000s. That would have been out of style. But I believe now we've lived long enough that this is now retro. So I don't know that I'd wear this to a game. I don't really like retro for games. Like, I wear the retro stuff on the show during the week, but I wouldn't, if I was going to a game, I'm going to sort of be a little preppier than that probably. So I like this again now because I view it to be retro. This I would wear anytime. That is such an incredible logo. I mean, that really, really speaks to me. I really like that a lot. And I love this one, man. I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that logo. And George is pretty good about this kind of stuff. I guess good's one word for it. Like, like we were kids, Disney would like put out a movie for a while. This is like pre-Disney Plus. They'd put out a movie for a while, and then they'd take it away, and they kind of put it what they call the Disney Vault. Y'all familiar with the Disney Vault? And there's some movies that sort of stay in the Disney Vault forever. But there's the Disney Vault that they kind of put a movie in, take it out, put it in, take it out. Georgia does that with logos, like the little dog biting on the pennant. Like, you can't just go anywhere, anytime, and buy that thing. Georgia will release some stuff with it, and then it won't do it for a while, and then it does it for a while. They don't really saturate the market with their gear, which I think is kind of interesting. They have their sort of own like Disney Vault style, I guess, behavior when it comes to logos, which I think is kind of cool. William Lowe says all the retro logos are sweet, but the standing bulldog is the best. Yeah, I can't imagine I will ever get tired of that. And I really don't know. It's kind of funny. Like, who knows why anybody likes what they like? Like, I don't know why I like that so much more than so many of the others. I just think that looks amazing. I just think that is such a sharp look. Such a sharp look. Such a sharp look. Let's see what else. The Wolf says the 70s and 80s, the sort of the dog face thing, is the best logo ever. It's certainly the one that makes me think about like falling in love with like Georgia athletics. And also, like, I've never been a very good artist, but when I was a kid, I stared at that thing forever and sort of learned how to draw it. It's like I'm not a good drawer at all, not even close to a good drawer. but I did sort of learn how to draw that when I was a kid, so I'd draw it all the time. For whatever reason, that's what that makes me think of. I couldn't draw anything today, but when I was a kid, I sort of learned how to draw that thing with that face that kind of goes over this way like that. Yes, I sort of learned how to draw that. I think when I drew it, though, I would always exaggerate like the face a little too much, probably a little too much lean on that. But that's a sharp thing. You know who stole that was didn't Georgetown steal that? Their basketball team essentially used the same deal. And doesn't like Fresno State, didn't they kind of use that too? It's amazing how many schools just all use the same logos. Like Missouri, Clemson, LSU, and Auburn all had that little like sort of like, you know, their sort of top hat tiger type thing. They all use the same logo. Strange to me how many schools just kind of basically borrow the same logo. I'm sure there's a reason for that. Let's see what else. But yeah, great job, Cody. Jack Fullerton calling out Jay Shipes. The Wolf says that Georgia's won 4 national champions. I'm a big believer that Georgia should claim a 5th. I believe that Georgia should claim the 1946 national championship. I think there are a lot more national championships claimed by a lot of other programs, a lot more specious, you know, than Georgia claiming the 46. And the thing to keep in mind here is, like in the sort of early days, 1940 is certainly an example of this, of the AP poll. Like there was, from my perspective, I've gone back and studied the history, and I'm also biased, so take this with a grain of salt. I don't mind telling you that. But if you go back and study, there's a lot of bias against the Southern teams in the early AP poll. So I like making fun of Alabama for claiming championships and things like that. Some of the claiming of national championships is sort of fixing what perhaps history didn't correctly litigate at the time. And you can go back and study this for yourself. It's like, you know, Midwestern teams, you know, college ball is not a Southern sport back then. And, you know, people are trying to sort of return it to those roots right now. But if you go back and look at the way some of the SEC, the Southern teams were treated back then, not getting the same level of credit they perhaps deserved. Most of the poll voters were not Southerners, the same way many of the folks on TV now are not Southerners. And so you had a little bit of, I would say, a bias in favor of Midwestern teams, Northeastern teams even back then. You had some of that going on. I would think that if you look at the merits of the 1946 season for Georgia, to me, that should be a national championship. And really what Georgia should have done, because if you do it now, you're going to get, you know, ribbed on by your rivals and things like that. I'm not sure you should care about that, but that is what would happen. The next time Georgia wins a national championship, during that year, they should also announce that they're claiming the 1946 national championship. I just think it'd be justice served. And while you're, you know, hanging new flags and things like that, just go up and throw one for 1946. I think they should probably do that. Jonathan Aaron asking about Ryan Grubb. I would assume that for Ryan Grubb, it's either Alabama or nothing. I'm not saying he wouldn't be a good hire for Georgia, but it's not even obvious that Grubb wants to coach at Alabama. So, you know, presuming he doesn't want to do that, you know, I don't know that, you know, he wants, you know, so I don't necessarily think of Grubb as a fit for Georgia. Schematically, I don't know that I don't know why it wouldn't be. I'm just saying it sort of seems like he's either going to go coach with his friend or perhaps be content to sort of, you know, wait for something else. That's the sense that I probably get. But he is obviously out there.
All right, here we go.
All right, here we go.
A little history lesson that I've found. I've done some internet research here. So you got all these logos that all kind of look the same, these old school logos.
Yeah, all that. I want you to notice, folks, you see the LSU down there, bottom row, second from the left. I mean, so many of those Tiger schools all basically use the same logo. But, yeah, tell me about this.
So the story is, I guess, it's a guy named Art Evans who drew them all.
Is that right?
And for whatever, I got to read. Sorry, I got to scroll down to read the rest of it. He worked for the Angelus Pacific Company of Fullerton, California, from 1932 till 77. They were known for decals. The word licensing wasn't on the radar back in that time, so he would just go bookstore to bookstore pitching these logos, and a lot of times he would just change the name on the hat.
Yeah.
So who knows who actually got all of these first, but they all definitely have that own look and own style, and it's something we all kind of have come to love.
So am I different than the average person? Because I would tell you that all of these look better than almost all of what these teams are using now. Is that just because I'm old-fashioned, or is there something to this? Because I'm like the same way, like my family, we watch a lot of like old Disney movies and things like that. I'm always amazed at the quality of the old animation, just how great the old movies look. They look so much better than what's being made right now. Is that just because I'm just ancient, or is that, am I right?
I feel like there's so much personality in all of these that lacks when you compose it on the computer.
Because, you know, like NC State is using that wolf face on their helmets now, and I think it looks amazing.
Miami one right in the middle. You still see that ibis sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that whole thing is just really, really sharp. I just think
but you definitely see the Auburn at the top row and the LSU at the bottom is the exact same
thing. Same thing.
He just drove over to Baton Rouge, changed the letters, and said, "Here you go."
I'm actually glad to know that. I did not. I always kind of wondered why they were so similar, and now you know. That's really good stuff. Cody Chafin's well done for sure. Well done. All right. George on tap mentioning a logo from the 90s that he doesn't like. I am a child of the 90s. I would say the 90s, for whatever reason, good for some things, not good for others. You know, good music from the 90s, pretty much whatever genre you want, good 90s music. 90s was a great decade for music. Really good decade for movies. Some would say maybe the last truly great decade for movies, some might say. Bad decade for sports apparel. Now, some of that has also now become retro, and so it's sort of like it's cool because it's old. But a lot of logos, a lot of stuff, and I say this as a child of the 90s, a lot of stuff that generated from the 90s, you know, not that great. Not that great. Kind of a bad era for logos. In fact, so much so that whatever kind of sport you think about, Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, whatever else, like the 80s version of these logos, still more popular than kind of the 90s version. Like think about the Hawks, Pac-Man 80s, that sort of hawk that the wings spread out in the 90s. You know, like very few instances of logo that came out in the 90s being more popular than one that came out in the 80s. Now, some of this stuff has sort of kind of found new life because of just the way that retro stuff kind of always does. And as a child of the 90s that likes a lot about the 90s, logos and sports gear, not necessarily that thing. Now, Foster Moss mentions like the starter jackets. And that, I would say that's a little bit of a different type of thing. Obviously, starter jackets, people, I mean, talk about just taking over the world. Like, I definitely remember when the starter stuff was taking over the world. Shaka Khan says in the 80s, all genres were great. If you're going to do a battle of music, and I'm talking about it's all genre now, all genres, I don't know that between rock, country, hip hop, I don't know that you're getting. Now, I also don't know that much about hip hop. I guess in the 90s, hip hop I know about because I was, you know, young in the 90s. But it's hard for me to imagine you're going to get a better sort of rock, country, hip hop, pop, I guess. Probably pop too. Hard for me to imagine you're going to get a better sort of like all-star team of music from those genres. Hard for me to imagine. I mean, like, now you may have all-time classic albums from the 80s. You certainly do. But in terms of just the depth of all the genres, hard to imagine it's going to be much better. Hard to imagine. Let me get Facebook for a moment. We'll see how people are doing over here. Faraday Pippin, by the way, checking in. Good to see Faraday, one of our DawgNation team members. She says, 90s country, hip-hop, rock, grunge, so much better than music today. I would say that's probably true. Now, I would also say that, you probably are biased, and I am clearly a 90s child. You probably are biased for your era, but I do think 90s did music really well. I think 90s did movies really well. It's kind of funny. Some decades do certain things well, and maybe certain things quite not so much. Jacob O'Neill also agrees with Faraday on that. Faraday's great. Y'all give her a follow. Brian Whitaker says there'll never be movies and music like there was in the 90s. I tell my kids all the time that I was lucky enough to be a 90s kid. We had the best things. I am very proud of my decade. Very proud of it. I'd also say this. Did y'all see where, like, Quentin Tarantino the other day was talking about how, like, he goes on this rant about, like, what even is a movie today? Like, we're sort of in the post-movie era. There's plenty of content. There are obviously, some 90-minute to 2-hour pieces of content. They don't really quite feel like movies as much anymore. I guess they don't have long, widespread theatrical releases. Maybe that's part of the issue there. But it definitely feels like we're in sort of a post-movie era. And honestly, I like movies. Like, sometimes you think about, like, a story, how you choose to tell the story. Well, you can do like a 6-part Netflix miniseries, but that's a lot of investment in time. You know what I'm saying? It's like you got to try to find 6 hours to watch all this kind of stuff, or in some cases even longer than that. That's a lot. That's a lot of time investment. There's something to be said for, tell me the story in 90 minutes here. Movies used to do that. Jeff Ingram says, what about movies 60s, 70s? Yeah, I'd say that, like, so my theory, I think I've said this before, is that every generation is interested in the era like 20 years prior to it. So as kids in the 90s, we were obsessed with the 70s. 70s movies, 70s cars, 70s – I like 70s TV shows. Most of my friends were probably not as into that, but I did like 70s TV shows. 70s movies, obviously in a huge part of that. Great classic era for the movies, for sure. By the way, William Camacho says he's a rock music connoisseur. He says his username in all gaming apps is RockFreak66. There you go. William Camacho got a little rock and roll history there. You love that. You love that. Jacob O'Neill says, once y'all got past the 90s, you lost me. Miriam Corbin checking in. Great to be able to see her. Matt Rugavina says if Georgia claimed the kind of like flimsy national titles that Tennessee does, that Georgia have 8 of them. Yeah, there's some of that goes on. I still think Alabama's probably the worst, but yeah, there's some of that goes on. And listen, I don't think the 46 thing is that exaggerated. In fact, let's see if we can pull this up for a second. 1946 Georgia. Y'all pardon me for a second. All right, the 1946 Georgia Bulldogs, according to Wikipedia, they were 11-0, 5-0 in the SEC, number 3 in the AP poll. So in the final AP poll released in early December, Georgia was ranked number 3 with 1,294 points behind number 1 Notre Dame with 1,730 points, and then Army that had 1,659 points. After the final AP poll was issued, the Bulldogs defeated number 9 North Carolina in the 1947 Sugar Bowl. Now listen to this. Neither Army nor Notre Dame played in the bowl game, and Georgia was the only one of the top 3 teams with an unblemished record. In later analysis, Georgia was recognized the 46th national champion under the Williamson system. Well, I don't know who Williamson is, but he sounds like the only guy from that era that knew the first thing about college football. You got Army and Notre Dame afraid to play in a bowl game because they don't want to, impact their ranking. Georgia puts its undefeated ranking on the line against a 9th-ranked North Carolina team, won the game 20-10. Plus, Charlie Trippi was I think he was the number 1 overall draft pick in the NFL draft from that team. I mean, how is that not a national championship? Yeah, so they beat. So listen to this. Beat number 7 Georgia Tech 35-7. So back then, just like it is today. Beat Kentucky was a top 20 team. Gives you an idea how long ago this was. Kentucky was a top 20 team. Alabama's a top 15 team. Shut them out. Beat Florida 33-14 in Jacksonville. Shout out to Chattanooga, scored 27 points on Georgia that year. I mean, how is this not a national championship team? I feel like it should have been. Beat Clemson the season opener. I mean, come on. Come on. To me, it's as simple as that. All right, let me get a couple of more comments. We're getting ready to get out of here. Garrison Tucker says late 60s was the best time for music era. I should say best time for music ever, I should say. Certainly a good one. So Savannah Bryant, I was born in the 70s, but I was in like high school in the 90s. So that's what I think of as my decade. I was in high school in the 90s. Yeah, I was born in the 70s. I'm not a child of the 70s. I don't remember that. My first sort of pop cultural memories, kid in elementary school when like Thriller was popular, Prince was popular, Purple Rain, Born in the USA when that was a big album. That's when I was in elementary school. But like your era is like when you're in high school. That's your era. SEM Dog says the old school pullover makes him want to say, "Go you, hairy dogs." And he said back then it was spelled D-O-G-S. That's interesting. When did the D-A-W-G-S come into play? Because I feel like when I was a kid, they had the old scoreboard at Sanford Stadium. Like, I'm talking about like 3 scoreboards ago that said "Welcome to Bulldog Country," and that was spelled D-A-W-G. I wonder when the D-A-W-G spelling began. So Garrison Tucker says he also likes the new dog face. So apparently more people like that than I realize. Excuse me. Apparently more people like that than I realize. Ken Holcomb also pointing out, in the old school days of baseball, you get hurt, you rub some dirt on it. There's no dirt to rub on injuries right there. I'll tell you this too: if you have kids, a lot of sort of youth fields are turf. Baseball is a different game on turf. It is a different game. The ball bounces crazy on turf. Infielders, I think, like it. Outfielders, I believe, hate it. Now, I don't know if the college game is going to be quite the same way because the college outfielders already cover a lot more ground. The ball doesn't really hit the ground much in the outfield anyway in the college game. But if you play like a youth league game on turf, if that ball is hitting the gap, it's going to roll to Alabama. I mean, that thing takes a hop and it is gone. Infield, I think they think it sort of takes a pretty nice hop. I think they would say. Catching can be a little bit weird. So there's a lot of turf at the youth baseball level now, and it is not the same game. And I'm not saying it's worse. I don't know that it is, but it's not the same game. Also interesting that Bill Belichick is reverting the field at Kenan Stadium back to grass after having been turf. There's this whole thing with the NFLPA about how they're going to push for real grass at all the stadiums, which is a huge undertaking. I mean, that'll never happen. I guess it's just a negotiating ploy to get more money from something else. I mean, do you know how hard it would be to because out west, I guess Arizona and Vegas, they do the thing where they bring the grass out and they move it in, which is a crazy piece of technology. But to sort of retrofit all the stadiums to be able to do that would be, golly, I don't even know. Keith Ritchie says, do you remember the hand-drawn prints they had of Herschel back in the grocery stores? I don't know that I remember that specifically, but I remember a lot of stuff sort of like that. And I love all those old Georgia giveaway type things. I love all that stuff. I'd keep all that if I could. All right. Anything else before we go? Christy mentioning Def Leppard. So I was in the 6th grade when Hysteria was a big album. That was being in the 6th grade in the late 80s was fun. That was really fun. Really fun. Foster Moss says he likes when they used to play football games on baseball fields. Yeah, that's a wild thing to see. I guess the last one to do that would have been Oakland. That's now been a few years ago. Wild thing to see, like, part of the football field, just dirt. Strange. I never went to a Falcons game at Fulton County Stadium. Never saw that. So, growing up, we were just not huge Falcons fans. We were big Braves fans, not huge Falcons fans. So I never saw a Falcons game at Fulton County Stadium. Richie Bales making a YouTube suggestion here. Richie, I appreciate that. I'll take a look at that. Jonathan Aaron says, do you think we'll ever get retro games in sports for like Washington or the Braves? I know that Tennessee goes back to the Oilers, but I'm talking Redskins or Oklahoma. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That's interesting. I'm not sure. And I do think it's interesting that the Titans will sometimes wear the old Oilers uniforms, obviously given the fact that it's a completely different, different city, right? And have you seen where like the Houston Cougars, the college team, will also adopt the old Oilers powder blue? I believe they've done that before. So there's a little bit of a fight about, who gets to own the powder blue. Does Nashville get to claim it because they have the organization, or does Houston own it because it was their city? A little bit of an interesting thing there. Foster Moss, I was born in 77, graduated in 95. Born in 77, graduated in 95. Jack Fullerton says the first time he heard hysteria, he sharpened his hearing because he thought they were saying hysteria. There's all kinds of lyrics I've sort of gotten wrong before. There was an old you ever watch VH1 Classic? They had a great little documentary about Hysteria, the album, and because the Def Leppard vocals were amazing. I don't know. I'm not a huge music connoisseur or anything like that, but I used to like to watch stuff like that. KC Oilers. By the way, how about that? Shouting out Buddy Ryan. Yeah. So I remember those old Oilers teams. I remember Jerry Glanville's first game as Falcons coach being against the Oilers. That was such a big deal. Glanville, for a while, had taken over the city. Took it over. All right. Garrison Duggar says, if Colbie Young plays in 2025, who gets the most deep balls thrown their way? Gunner threw some dimes in the Sugar Bowl. Yeah, no doubt Colbie Young will be a factor on those. Also, if he plays red zone too, it's interesting. Georgia could certainly have a lot of receivers in the mix. That could be a lot of fun to see. All right, we got to go for now. Y'all check out our RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Going to be some nice weather coming up, but cold weather is still going to be with us. So make sure your heating system is still ready to go for the rest of the winter that's on its way. Find RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs, always a good thing. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. One final show to close out the week. We'll see you then for it, right here on DawgNation Daily. We'll talk to you soon.